Welcome to the third lecture of product modeling, and today I'm going to talk about design automation through VB scripts. It's going to be some PowerPoint slides, and then I'm going to show you hands-on how it works in CATIA. Alright, so as I described in previous lectures, we're going to use the following lectures to actually model a complete aircraft in CATIA V5, creating basically a aircraft configurator from scratch. And this is the type of knowledge which I want to convey in this course. So this is what you will also implement in your projects, and hopefully something which you can bring with you as a powerful tool set to your careers. Okay, and speaking of that, if you look at summary from the last lecture, I talked about different type of tools and how these tools can be valuable depending on the resource. So if you know how to use the tool, meaning if you have the good methods for how to use the tools, then the tools can make help you to make something great. But it depends on you as a resource to know how to use them. And then also we made some models in CATIA, and we're going to continue with these models in order to further automate them together with Visual Basics. Okay, another lesson from last lecture is do not rush to details. Take basics first. Don't start doing a lot of advanced solids and surfaces. Start with the wireframes, make the skeleton work. Make sure that the model can correspond to the various requirements in terms of changes necessary. Basics first. That's the most important thing to remember. Another valuable lesson is you have to maximize the number of iterations that you can do. So with pen and paper, the number of iterations can increase because lead time decreases comparing to CAD. So pen and paper is good as long as it fulfills the requirements. Also, I talked about this in previous lecture. It's okay to start off bad. It's okay if you make mistakes. The most important factor is that you learn from it, and it only sucks to make a mistake if you don't learn anything from it. Otherwise, it's really great. Failing is great as long as you learn from it. Okay, so in order to write good code, you need to plan it, you need to write it, you need to test it, and you need to clean it. And we're going to go through these steps in today's lecture. And when it comes to writing the code, you have a couple of different ways to do it for CATIA. One is that you can record macro, and then you can get a big bulk of code that you can reuse. There is another function which is called insert object resolution, which is another way to capture code directly in CATIA. We use VB editor in Excel simply because it's easy, and also it gives you a good possibility to debug more than you could in CATIA V5. Also, searching on the web is really recommended. You can find out really good tips and tricks. The automation process must be clearly defined. Which parts and features are going to be automated? How are they going to be automated? Today, we're going to automate this process of instantiating ribs in a wing. What I would suggest is that you try to do these steps seen in this slide. So help me decide the steps needed in order to instantiate ribs in a wing with one parameter, change the position of the rib with a parameter, and then delete the rib with a parameter. So write down these steps on a piece of paper and see what you come up with. And as I said before, just think about the manual steps that you would have taken in order to do this. Group them together and then structure them, and then those are the steps that we're going to have for our automated process as well. So here you can pause the video and then you can write down the steps. Just think about how it should be, write down the steps, and then you can compare it with my list. Okay, welcome back. For instantiating ribs, what we need to do is to create a new part. We need to rename the part so it has a correct name. So when we create a new part, usually it gets a random name in CATIA, for example, part 7 or something like that. We rename it and then we copy the references from another part in order to have references for our ribs to be instantiated within. For example, we need the wing surface and so on. After we copy the references, we have to paste them in the part. These are the steps you probably took when you did the wing tutorial back in the basic part of the course. After pasting the references, we need to instantiate our power copy. So these are the steps needed in order to instantiate ribs. What is not mentioned here is that usually we want to instantiate more than just one rib. So these points are actually within a loop. So we have a loop where we create a new part, and then when we rename the part, it takes the number of loop within renaming and so on. And this is something that I can show you more in detail when we're going to do the hands-on exercise with CATIA and VB. Changing the position of the rib. Now, this is quite simple. We only need to change the parametric value. And this is only in the case where you have done it in a good way, so that all your rib is dependent on a specific point, so that when you change the position of that point, everything else just follows. So if your model is done in a good way, then you don't need to change more than a parametric value in order to change the position of the rib. In order to delete the ribs, this is also quite simple. You just need to find the ribs to delete, and then you delete them. And here it is important why we needed to give them specific names when we created the ribs to begin with. So when we know the names of the ribs, then we can locate them and then we can delete them. Here is a section where I will just go through the different functions available in order to write the code for design automation. So one function is a record macro. I've talked about this before. There's a lot of things that you can record, but some things are not possible to record. And how you do it is that you start by selecting start recording, and then you can press the button start in order to record it. And here we go, you recorded, and then you do the operations necessary. In this case, we create a new part, and then when we have created a new part in an assembly, we just stop the recording, and then when we go inside the recorded macro, we can see that here we have a couple of lines of scripts, and this is something which we can use when we are going to write our own code. Another possibility is to create a reaction, and then while you have created a reaction, there is a function which is called insert object resolution. If you press that function, then you can press on, in this case, plane.1. And when you press plane.1, then you get all the necessary code needed in order to locate plane.1 in the object library. So the code, the VB code is a class-based code, meaning that everything is structured in specific layers of classes and functions, and in order to find a specific plane, in this case, you need to go through this hierarchy of code in order to locate it. And it's not so easy if you're not well versed in how everything is structured. So this is a good way of finding, for example, how to locate a plane in this hierarchy of code. So using the VB editor in Excel is much recommended, and that is because it's easy to use and it's much easier to debug your code when using Excel. When I'm showing my hands-on examples, you can see that I'm also using the VB editor in Excel. It's simply very easy tool to use when you're testing your code. In order to set up your VB editor in Excel, you need to go into Excel options, Trust Center, macro settings, and then you need to press on enable all macros and trust access to the VBA project. And then you can start writing your code as such. Two very good functions to know is that you can use the function F8 to go through the code line by line, and then you can also have your CATIA window in parallel and see what happens when you're going through a specific line of code. Another thing is that if you want to see what a specific function does, you can add watch to it, and then you can see how that function, what it contains, and so on. So here is an example. You right click on relations 1, you press on add watch, and then you press OK, and then you have that in the watch list. And what happens is that when you press F8 and then you come down to relations 1, when you have read relations 1, then you can go through this list of that is contained in relations 1, and then you can see that it includes names and values and everything, and that can help you to further write your code. For testing the code, you need to decide a set of various parameter values to test the code. So you want to know what specific shapes your model should be able to take, and that gives you the range of parameter values that it needs to be able to do. And you basically perform the test by changing the values of the parameters, and then you see if your code is robust enough and if it works. If not, then you apply necessary changes to your models and your codes in order for it to make in order to test it again and see if it works. And then you test each of the functions, codes, and parts in order to verify that everything works as it should. When it comes to your project, I strongly suggest that you do at least one test of the whole design of the project each week. So if you're working in a group, then it's important that as soon as possible you put together all the different parts of the project, and then you make sure that everything works together. And waiting to put everything together in the end could be a major disaster if things are not working well together. So it's very important to test it as soon as possible, so that if there is something inherently wrong with one of the models, you can catch it as soon as possible. After you're done with the testing, you probably have a very ugly code, a very long code, and it needs cleaning. So you can use loops and functions in order to decrease the number of rows of your code and make it more efficient and much more neat looking. And there are a lot of different examples on the web how to create functions. It's not that hard. The only thing that you need to do is to define the function where you define an input or inputs. And in this case, we have an add function where we have input D and P. And here the value of the function is then equal to D plus B, and then we just end the function after that. And then in the subroutine, you can use the function in order to do additions. So obviously this is a unnecessary functions, because doing an addition is really simple. You don't need to create a function for that. But sometimes a lot of lines of code are repeated in your code, and it's best if you group them together, create a function, and then it's only occurred once in your code. Loops is also something that you have probably used, and sometimes it can also help you to decrease the number of lines of code in your project. Another way of doing loops is with while loops. And then we have a couple of slides for VB tips and tricks. One important is not to name the parameter by double-clicking on the parameter and then change the name. The correct way of changing the name of the parameter is to right-click and then go into Properties and then change the name of the parameter. If you don't do this, then you can have some problems when you're going to reach that value from VB. And this is something where a lot of students see that they are having problems when they're trying to reach that value. And it's because when they named the parameter first time, they just double-clicked on the parameter and then changed the name directly. So it's important to do it in properties. Many of you will have a problem with the selection code. There is a code where you can select specific objects and features in CATIA. In order to not have any problems with that, always define the selection equal to the active document dot selection. Then there will never be a problem. Do not store the power copy in the same product assembly which you're doing the instantiation. It should be stored somewhere else, not in the products assembly. When saving, do not save the product together with instantiated parts. Put the number of instances to 0 and then save. Finding specific references. Well, here is just a example code for finding specific references. I don't need to go through each line, but you know that it exists here, and then you can go to this PowerPoint slide and just fetch this code if you need it. VB code for clearing cache in CATIA. This is something which some of you will need in order to reuse specific names when naming different parts and features. When you remove or decrease number of parts in CATIA, you don't want to get contextual link warnings. And here is the code you need to use in order to not have that problem. The solution is basically to find all external references and then remove the external references before you delete the part. Then you will not get a contextual link warning. And that was my last slide. Thank you for bearing with me, and then I'll see you on the next lecture.